I'm Tricia Perry for Vision of the Valley. It looks like this segment is about a walk in the park, and while that's partly true, it's also a walk in the classroom, the former classroom and homestead of the schoolmaster to the nation, our very own William Holmes McGuffey. Surely we could not be in a more beautiful setting. Very lovely, the countryside, but we're very close to Coatesville and Youngstown, and this actually is just not any plot of land. It is a plot of land that's connected to you.
Yes.
And connected to the history of the valley.
Exactly.
Tell me about it. Tell me who is here.
Well, I'll tell you, when I was a little girl, my mother always told us that we were related to William Holmes McGuffey, but it didn't have a lot of meaning to me at the time. And my dad was from Pennsylvania, so once or twice a year we would come out through Coatesville, and we got to the center down there. She would say to us, my sister and I, "This is where your ancestors came from." And as a little girl hearing that, I thought, wow, that excited me. And this has always kind of been holy ground to me. It is truly beautiful.
Was there a homestead? Was there a house here?
Yeah, there was a cabin. And then someone bought the land after, they went back after McGuffey's left it here, and there was a bigger home that was here. And it's gone too.
So fast forward many generations from the time the McGuffeys had this land and had a homestead here. You come into the picture because you are what relation to him?
Okay, his sister Anna married Nehemiah Harris, and my mother was a Harris. So my grandfather would have been related to would have been his, her grandson, great-grandson.
So she's your great-great Anna.
She's great-great. His mother would be my great-great-great, and she also was Anna Holmes.
Okay, so he was born in 1800, I believe, and how long did he live here? Because I noticed from reading about him that he lived everywhere, sort of.
Yeah, his mother, Anna, was an educated woman. She came to this, as they used to call it, the Western Reserve. Few women could read, and she could read and she could write, and wanted that for her children. So she was educating them at home, but she heard about this Reverend Wick, who lived where the Youngstown Board of Education is now. That was where his home was. And she heard that he tutored students, and she wanted more for their children besides what she could do. So she encouraged her husband, Scotty McGuffey, as they called him, to plow a place, or plow a path, so they could go to school there. And that's the path. Can you imagine when you look at this and think about how far that was, and to plow it with a horse?
Right, and all the way
have
into
to cut the trees down as you're going.
Yes.
And that's what they did. And once they had it plowed, the boys went to school there, to Reverend Wick's school. And then later, when they were through with that, she could see that William had a more desire for education than the other children. Legend has it that she was out here in the front and praying out loud that somehow, some way, William could get a higher education. Now, supposedly, the Dean of Admissions from the Old Stone Academy in Darlington, Pennsylvania, came by in a buggy and heard her praying. Now, whether that's true or not, but he did get a scholarship to that Old Stone Academy. After he graduated from there is when he started his teaching career, and I read somewhere where he was about 14. That seems so young, but it could be. And he started as a traveling teacher in the southern part of Ohio. And what that means is, the farmers would have enough money to hire a teacher. And when he didn't, he'd come back home here to Coatesville, but he left early and was a teacher.
And then he became university president and that kind of thing. But he also developed this,
Yes.
the Reader, which is what he's most famous for, right?
Right. He was contacted by people to put this together. and was a Cincinnati publishing company. And he was at that time a professor at Miami University. And he had come back home when his mother died and got his younger brother, Alexander, to go live with him in Miami where he was. And he agreed to do that. And he received $1,000 and a barrel of ham every year at Christmas for the work. That's all he got. And of course, that Cincinnati publishing company got very well to do. And he and his brother compiled these, and they start with first grade and go all the way up.
And now Mill Creek Park owns the land. It's part of the park district, correct?
Yes. And that came about when they realized they weren't going to have enough money to keep with this going, paying taxes and so forth. So they offered it first to Youngstown State University, and the university asked money for it. If we'd would give them money. Mill Creek Park took it, and they do take good care of it. And we're very pleased with that.
So as far as the public knows, what can the public do here? Can they stop by and walk the paths and that kind of thing?
And if you look through the Mill Creek Park when they're having activities, they do have walks out here.
What do you think it means to the Valley to have this here?
You know, I'm a history buff. I love history, and I think we can learn from history. But one of the things that we all need are heroes. And McGuffey was a man who's and his family, his father, his mother, they believed so much in education, and he did too. And I think he should be a hero to any teacher. You know, that's what I was. And you look at a man who cared enough that want all children to be educated to the best of their ability. And he wanted to be the best he could be. I mean, he didn't have a college education when he started. I read where he came back here once when he didn't have a job, and he heard they were hiring in Warren. So he went up there and took this test, and it was then he began to realize, I don't know as much as they do. They're better educated than me. So that's when he went to Washington College, and he got his degree. And it was after that that he went to Miami University and put his best. He was the most loved professor. He was a good teacher. His mind was so wonderful. He memorized the whole entire Bible. And he was a Presbyterian minister too. And they say there are no sermons written because he had them all in his head.
So you must be very proud of this area here.
Oh yeah, I told you, this is holy ground to me, and it's just a great part. But you know, I just think what we need to do is have people to look up to. That here from this valley, here's this man that came from very, very poor, here they were, with nothing here. They had to plow it and build this legacy. It's amazing.
We're here with Regina Reese, who's a retired reading specialist from YSU and teacher, and this is the perfect person to talk to after speaking with Shirley, because you really understand the value of what William Holmes McGuffey was trying to do and the things that he came up with as an educator. Tell me about that. Tell me what he did in your mind that's the most significant thing.
Well, I think what McGuffey did was he first of all decided or realized that you can help students by providing them with reading material that they're interested in. Now, you have to understand too, because he had a religious bent too. He was a Presbyterian minister, and so he wanted to teach a lesson. And so when you read the stories, many of them have definite moral lessons. So he included that, but he was interested in what the children thought. And what he would do when he was at Miami University, he would bring the kids, the neighborhood kids, to the front porch. He'd gather them together, read them stories, have them read, he'd talk. He would find out what pushed their buttons, and he would include those things. So you'll have stories about animals and about nature and about historical figures who he thought were important as role models for these kids. So that's how he came to get some ideas. Also, he realized at the time, the idea was if you couldn't spell, you probably couldn't read. And McGuffey realized that spelling didn't really matter. So he wanted to use a model where these students would learn the basics, kind of a bottom up. Okay, now you're going to learn your words, we're going to put them together in sentences, we're going to make some meaning, and some of those ideas still hold true. When you look at the notes to the teachers, he will say to them, don't just have the kids pick up and read, to preview with them and to do some of the things we like teachers to do.
So you have here one of the readers, and it's
Yes.
the 6th eclectic reader. Why do they call it eclectic?
Because it encompasses a lot of things. Because he has fiction, nonfiction, poetry, phonics.
Right. And this was one of many that he developed and edited and wrote.
Right.
Correct?
Now, actually, he only did, he did the first series, he did 4 of them, and then his brother took over and did some of the other ones.
And then here we are standing in the middle of this gorgeous wildlife preserve, talking like we're in a classroom. How do you relate the two?
Well, my philosophy about teaching is the world is your classroom, not just the 4 walls. So I was thinking if McGuffey were here with his students or with any children, he would have them, well, let's take a look at the trees. Let's look at the leaves. What do we see? What are the sounds that we hear? Like we're hearing right now.
Yes.
And so they would go from there. That's what I would do. We'd use nature as part of the learning. You hear the sights, the sounds, the smells, you hear the rhythm of life, and that's what language is all about. Because one of the things that he has in the books too is he tells students how to approach reading. You don't slouch, you don't put the book up, you hold the book and you read with expression. And he said if the selection is has a melancholy nature, you read it that way. If it has a happy feel, you read it that way. And it's really kind of interesting because he believed in a lot of oral recitation too, which is that fluency. The
Right.
fluency that we're looking for.
Reading aloud. Yes, yes. So we should be pretty proud that we have this connection.
I
and then
believe
this
so.
connection where we are right
Absolutely.
now. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he only did this as part of his career. He otherwise was a great educator.
Yes, he
And
was.
Do you think he should be considered a hero? Like Shirley said?
Absolutely. I think he should be considered a hero for all of us. And I know he was strict and maybe people wouldn't agree with some of his methodology, but the whole general idea of him wanting to educate everyone needs to learn, everyone needs to be able to read so you could be a better citizen. The schoolmaster of our nation is what they call him. And I think that it's very appropriate.
This is sort of the path to the house was somewhere back there, right?
Yes.
It's no longer there. But
Right.
he lived here he wasn't born here.
No.
He lived here when he was a little guy
Right.
till
And then he, when he started to go to school with Reverend Wick,
right.
he walked all the way downtown. And then in the wintertime, it was just too much. He ended up living with the Wicks
Right.
while he was going to school. An interesting story about McGuffey's mother was her family lived in Washington County, PA, and they were very well respected. They were admired in the county because they had a library in their house.
Oh wow.
Guess how many books they had?
I don't know.
6.
Oh,
And that was considered a library back then. And when you think at the end of the 1700s, and if you owned 6 books, you were right there.
Yeah. So it came from that. I'm sure that
Absolutely.
he had a love of books and reading. and
Yes,
teaching.
because I believe his father was illiterate, but his mother was so interested in reading and so interested in learning, and she realized at an early age that he had a gift. They would go to church, and he would come home, and on the way, he would recite the sermon almost word for word because he just could remember, and he understood at an early age. And I'm imagining that she probably rescued him from chores sometimes. You know, the father would say, you've got to come out here and help on the farm, do the chores. And I could just envisioning this woman saying, okay, now come on, it's time for us to read.
Yes.
The chores can wait because my son has this talent.
So as a teacher today in this century, how can you relate what he knew to this and what he did in that experience to this?
Well, I think he was a lifelong learner, and that's what teachers hope. And I believe that's what McGuffey had. That was his passion, that he always was looking for something. And because he had that passion for learning and reading, he wanted to pass it along to others. And I think that is one of the keys.
Well, Richard Scarcella, as head of the William Holmes McGuffey Historical Society, you have an important part because all we've heard about this morning while we're in this beautiful setting is the history that he represents, not only for the Valley, but for the whole country of American readers.
Right.
So how did you get involved? Why is this a passion for you?
Well, I'm really known as an Idora Park historian.
I remember.
And the architect I had hired to do an evaluation of the Idora Park Ballroom told me that he was on the board of the William Holmes McGuffey Historical Society, and would I be interested in coming to a meeting and maybe helping out? I said, sure. I went to the meeting. A couple months later, I was the president, and I've been the president or chairperson for over 20 years now. And when I found out that McGuffey was considered one of the greatest American educators of all time right here in Mahoning County, I thought, well, I should do my part to help keep the legacy alive. And we've had a lot of wonderful members and a lot of community support. So it's been a lot of fun, but a labor of love.
So speaking of mansions, I know you can talk about his life here, his life in whole, I'm sure, but also his life here. There was a house here. There was a boyhood home right here.
Right. There was a cabin here, which long ago disappeared, and his father built a path through the woods for the children to walk to Youngstown to be educated by Reverend Wick at the Parsonage School. And this property, years later, had a large Victorian farmhouse that McGuffey never lived in, but we did have a McGuffey descendant living in the house, our caretaker, Tom Rogers. So up until the time we deeded the property, 78 acres, free and clear to Mill Creek Park in 1998, imagine we had a McGuffey relative living here in the property.
Amazing. When did it find its way to the National Register of Historic Places?
Well, if you take a look, it happened in 1966, and that is a very rare designation, usually reserved for the homes of dead presidents.
Right.
So to have a National Historic Landmark right here in the Youngstown area is significant.
So based on that, what does that mean for this property? Is it protected somewhat as part of our heritage?
Having a National Historic Landmark designation means that the owner can and cannot do certain things. And we put deed restrictions on the property when we gave it to Mill Creek Metro. They're not allowed to drill here. They're not allowed to build here, strip mine. So the property is protected in perpetuity, which is exactly what our organization intended.
So how do you see this fitting into Valley history and the importance of it?
Well, it's really remarkable that a man of McGuffey's national significance, he literally taught America how to read, America's schoolmaster, America's storyteller, came from Mahoning Valley, and we have his property. If I asked you where were the Warner Brothers' home, you wouldn't know. Where's John Butler's home? It's gone. But imagine, here's the family homestead. Here's the family Native American lookout where they would watch for Native Americans right here. So we're very fortunate to have a living piece of history. You can walk the same pastures, the same trails on the property that McGuffey and his siblings walked.
Tell me about that lookout. What are you talking about when you're referring to that?
Well, it's the point at which a glacier will stop moving and it begins to melt and recede. It left an unusual layer of strata, and coincidentally enough, they found slag in it. And it actually went straight across McGuffey Road, but you can't tell because they used it for slag for the steel industry. But the Native Americans used it as a wild game lookout. When the white man came, the white pioneers used it as a Native American lookout, watching for Native Americans.
So this still is somewhat of a classroom. It's just not maybe the classroom he taught in.
Yes, YSU uses it extensively, especially their science department. Different high schools will come out here. I'm on the Mahoning Soil Water Conservation Board of Supervisors, and I've brought people out here as well. It's kind of a green enclave in the middle of a formerly smoky valley.
So we think of him as leaving the books, but he also left this.
Well, what a lot of people don't know, if you look very closely at the 7 eclectic readers, and they really were eclectic. It was a little bit of this and a little bit of that. McGuffey was very unusual for his time. He preached conservation. He preached taking care of nature, that you were a steward of God. That was very unusual because years ago people came west to master, to subdue nature. He had a very high regard for it, and the poems and the stories that he selected in the 7 readers reflect that interest. He was way ahead of his time.
There are still remnants of the family here, like this structure, which looks like a well to me.
There are. We found the remains of the family well, and we had it excavated and rebuilt and covered. And the reason why the wells were near the road, most people don't know, is that you would let anybody going down the road water their horses at the family well. That was considered being hospitable, and of course they were staunch Christians, so they felt it was their Christian duty. There's a lot of water on the property, a lot of wildlife. They're attracted to the water, and of course the well is connected into the family pond, which also remains.
And those are about the only things of the actual family living.
Well, Dr. John White, now since passed, archaeologist of YSU, some years ago they discovered what they thought were the family cabin foundation stones further into the preserve. But that building has long since disappeared. The cabins were not built to last very long.
Right. And so the way it is now, where it's preserved as basically a nature preserve, it's fitting to be this way, this kind of classroom maybe.
Well, you know, McGuffey was born on a farm on the outskirts of a dirty, smoky industrial valley. So imagine, not only did he have a love of nature, being raised out here, but he also knew that people needed to be educated to improve their standard of living in a city such as Youngstown.
How does the Historical Society maintain itself as a society, funding-wise?
Well, we had produced a professionally created DVD a year ago for one of our anniversaries. We have monthly programming, high-interest topics open to the public, and of course we always talk about McGuffey at the beginning of the meetings. We have a very active lecture speaker bureau. We go out into the Tri-County area and talk about the McGuffey legacy. So we are now the last McGuffey chapter in the nation of a McGuffey Federation that at one time numbered 100,000 nationwide, and we're the last. We have McGuffey family relatives in our organization, and the good news is we're actually growing. We're actually attracting members. People seem to respond to our marketing outreach, and as long as we're alive, we're going to keep doing what we're doing.
So if someone sees this and wants to know how to contact someone about being a member of the McGuffey, did you call it the Federation?
Well, we were a member of the Federation, which has since closed, but if you'd like to become a member of the William Holmes McGuffey Historical Society, you can come to one of our meetings and get a membership form, or call 330-726-8277.
The McGuffey Preserve is part of the Mill Creek Metro Parks, but it's off the beaten path in the rural, undeveloped area east of Youngstown. But it's a great place for nature lovers to explore and for teachers to bring their students. So if I was in your classroom at YSU, at Youngstown State University, and you brought me out here as one of your students, what would you be talking about? What would you want to show me?
There's a lot of plant diversity in old field communities.
And that's what this is, an old field community.
We would call it an old field community that will eventually, without fire or mowing, would convert to a forest. So you got, hardwood species like this oak that's growing, and so it will eventually revert back to a forest as long as things like fire and mowing don't occur.
Right. So that isn't a very old tree, right?
That is probably, I am guesstimating, maybe 8 years, maybe.
Okay, and that just kind of grew up here probably from other oak trees in the area.
Interestingly, things like blue jays move acorns around and squirrels and other organisms, and so this is called, seed dispersal, and you've got things like this growing up here.
And if left to go, it would be maybe a whole forest of trees like that.
And we don't see it right now, but we've got forest here. So, we've got old field and forest, but we've got sort of a conversion, we call it succession, where you've got, sort of an intermediate stage between old field and forest.
Right. So that we're in an old field, we're looking at this plant here. To me, it looks like just a bunch of overgrowth, but it is not. That's important.
This is a beautiful plant. This is a classic textbook example of what monarch butterflies, which they winter in Mexico, and they lay their eggs on only this plant, only this genus, I should say. So this is Asclepias. I don't mind, this is a nature preserve, but I can break this, and
oh wow,
you see this.
Looks like glue.
It looks like glue. Yes, exactly.
Like Elmer's glue.
And this has cardiac glycosides, so I would not encourage you to have this for your salad, because you would die.
Fabulous.
And yet this butterfly has evolved to feed exclusively on this genus of plants.
So this is something you would be teaching your students out here?
That's one of the things, for sure. What we have is we've got lots of native and non-native species.
What's this right here? This looks like something you could possibly eat?
That is a raspberry.
Oh, wonderful.
So we got native raspberries. We got, again, our common milkweed right here. Mm-hmm. We have a non-native Japanese beetle that is right there. And
hey,
this is my lovely daughter. And I think it's very important to have children exposed to nature, because there's a book called The Last Child in the Woods, I think is what it's called. And a lot of children don't get exposed to nature. And so, here we go. We got, how many flowers do we have here? Probably over 100. And a lot of the species that we see here are called composites. And the flowers mature at different times. And so pollination, we get a lot of different gene flow among this, which is one reason why this particular plant family is about 9% of the 265,000 species of flowering plants that we have on the planet. We have another species right here. This is one of our non-natives.
I know it by Queen Anne's lace.
Queen Anne's lace, exactly. And so this is from Europe, if I'm not mistaken, and it's non-native. One of the interesting things about non-natives is you don't see a lot of herbivore damage. Out here, we don't see the insects, we don't see the spiders, but they exert a lot of influence on these particular types of communities.
So this is really just a huge classroom to you. This is endless.
It's a huge classroom.
And
yes, it's a very, there's so many different dynamics that are going on right here.
So just for that reason alone, it must be valuable to save this as it's being preserved right now instead of develop it, or?
Absolutely. So here we've got a Lepidopteran larva, or caterpillar, and these guys remarkably feed probably on only one of the many, many different species of plants that we have out here. So when we talk about plant diversity and the importance of plant diversity, one of the important things is that we have a lot of species like this guy, which I don't know the species of this, but would feed maybe on only one plant. So when you've got 10, 20 species out there, or 30 or 40, you've got lots of different insects that feed on that. You've got a lot of birds that might feed on this. You've got other birds that feed on those other birds. And so, you know, the importance of plant diversity in systems like McGuffey is that you get lots of different species that emerge from the plants.
What catches my eye here is that beautiful, is it a purple thistle or something like that?
This is actually called teasel, and this is a member of the only plant family that occurs in North America. It is introduced, but one of the things with introduced plants, okay, we've got natives, we talked about the common milkweed, and non-natives. There's a lot of insects that will use this as a resource. And those insects do lots of things. I mean, if there's an orchard, if you have an apple orchard out there, you need the pollinators for that. So areas like McGuffey, they support lots of pollinators that go elsewhere and do other things. So a non-native, but nonetheless, you know, supporting, you know, some resources to pollinators. And I would like to point this plant out too, and I'd like my daughter to smell that. So that's mint. This is spearmint right here.
Oh wow.
A non-native.
I didn't realize it had a flower like that. I know, you know, the leaves I sort of thought looked similar. So there are trails here and you can walk along, and on the way we can see all kinds of different things. Like this to me is something that causes, I think, allergies. Hay fever?
Incorrect.
No. Okay.
So interesting about showy flowers, they don't broadcast their pollen, which is one of the main causes of something like hay fever. When you get showy flowers, we just saw an insect on these guys, and so these are insect pollinated. This is one of the many species of goldenrods that are here. So if you come out here in the late summer to fall, you've got this beautiful canopy of all these flowering plants. And so this is one of the earlier flowering plants of goldenrod, one of our native species.
And right behind that, these look like new trees to me.
This is a nature preserve, but I don't mind pulling a leaf here. So did somebody come up here and eat this leaf? Or we've got insects that are eating this. So the caterpillar that we saw right there, you've got lots of insects that are feeding on the tissue of the plants.
What's happening with this plant right here?
This is called pappus, and this is one of the members. So you can actually break this up, and you've got lots of seeds here, but it's a wind dispersed plant. And if you look at all these plants, how do they get to where they go? One of the things is on seed dispersal. So there are various mechanisms by which plants can disperse their seeds, and that's a very important process in ecology. So, obviously how these plants got to where they are, they had to have their seeds dispersed. So this is a wind dispersed plant. And we just had right here, we've got another non-native species. These are beetles, which there are over 1 million species of beetles on the planet. Here's two. Well, this is one species, Japanese beetles.
Would you do that? I'm not gonna touch it.
Okay.
Okay, I don't know trees very well, but I know by just looking at this that there are several different kinds just right here. Tell me about that. It has berries. That one looks like an oak tree again, right?
Another oak.
And then this one.
A black walnut.
So these all came to be.
These are all, you got a mixture of non-natives, which we talked about, and we got native species here, which usually, produce more insects, again, with the energy transfer. But as we walk along, one of the great things about McGuffey is we just visited the old field and we saw lots of different species.
Right.
We have different species that occur obviously in an environment like a forest.
Right.
And so you've got lots of different species. When you start getting different habitat types, you get a lot of different types of species. We got poison ivy right there.
Which she knew, you knew right away.
Yeah.
Virginia creeper. Yeah, you got lots of different types of oak species right here.
But it was William Holmes McGuffey's birthplace and homestead, and he was the father of education with his McGuffey readers. So it's kind of, to me, a full circle kind of thing.
I think a full circle, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, still a classroom, and he was important in the classroom, in different kinds of classrooms.
Very much so. And so we got multiflora rose right here, which has thorns, and we've got blackberries.
Oh, yummy.
One of our native species. Want to eat it? Okay.
Okay, so we're looking at all these different kinds of plants and trees. Why is it important that there are so many different kinds here, including ones that are not native to this country?
You start looking at the different types of plants that you have, and you've got different leaf and root architectures. You tend to get more productivity out of systems that are much more biologically diverse than those that are not. And so when you start getting a lot of plant diversity, which we have at McGuffey for sure, you start getting a lot more productivity. And, again, you start supporting higher trophic levels.
So in the scheme of things, for just the general public who sees that this is, part of Mill Creek Park District, diversity is good, right?
Diversity is good.
We're going to keep feeding everything and it'll grow and grow.
And in so many different levels. If you like birds, you're going to get a lot more bird species in areas like McGuffey.
The importance of forest fires and the campaign that was so big when we were kids, Smokey the Bear, is not really the right message.
It's not the right message. I mean, people don't want their houses to burn down, but fire, it has historically been a very important part of the ecosystem for lots of different systems. And so when you start getting forest fires, people think destruction. They see, plants burning, they see maybe animals even burning, but that tends to promote diversity. It sounds paradoxical, but fire tends to be quite a good element in the system.
So this is a pretty complicated classroom. It's not just a simple...
It's a complicated classroom, yes. Yes, and there's lots to talk about at areas like McGuffey and elsewhere.
Today, this local McGuffey Society is the last one left of a federation that once had 100,000 members, but it is growing, and if you want to become a member or see the preserve, call 330-726-8277. For Vision of the Valley, I'm Tricia Perry.